Sarah Mitchell stood in front of her bathroom mirror, staring at the invitation card she had been holding for the past 20 minutes. The elegant cream-colored paper with gold lettering announced her college best friend Emma's wedding, scheduled for next month in the beautiful countryside of Vermont. She should have been excited. She should have already responded with an enthusiastic yes. But instead, her hands trembled slightly as she read the words over and over again, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. The morning sun streamed through the small window of her modest apartment, casting warm light across the cluttered counter filled with her son's toothbrush, superhero-themed soap dispenser, and the various medications she kept organized in a weekly pill container. Life had changed so dramatically since her college days when she and Emma would stay up all night talking about their dreams, their future weddings, and the lives they imagined living. Back then, Sarah never could have predicted where she would end up or the challenges she would face. She walked into the living room where her 7-year-old son sat cross-legged on the floor, completely absorbed in building an elaborate structure with his colorful blocks. His tongue stuck out slightly in concentration, a habit he had developed when focusing intently on something. Sarah's heart swelled with love as she watched him. It was her entire world, her reason for breathing, her motivation to keep pushing forward even when life felt impossibly difficult. He was also the reason she hesitated about the wedding invitation clutched in her hand. Was born with cerebral palsy, a condition that affected his muscle coordination and movement. While his mind was sharp and his spirit unbreakable, his body didn't always cooperate the way he wanted it to. He used a wheelchair for longer distances and had leg braces that helped him walk short stretches with assistance. He also had speech challenges that made communication difficult for people who didn't know him well, though Sarah understood every word he said, every expression he made, every need he had before he even voiced it. Over the years, Sarah had become accustomed to the stares, the whispers, and sometimes the outright exclusion that came with having a child with special needs. She had developed a thick skin, learning to advocate fiercely for her son while also protecting him from the cruelty that sometimes emerged from ignorance. But that protective instinct also made her cautious about putting him in situations where he might face rejection or discomfort. And weddings, she had learned, could be particularly tricky territory. She had attended 2 weddings since was born. The first had been her cousin's wedding when was 3. The invitation had said children were welcome, so Sarah had brought him along, excited to celebrate with family. But throughout the ceremony had made some sounds during the quiet moments, and Sarah had felt the judgmental glances from other guests. During the reception, when special diet requirements couldn't be accommodated and he started to get fussy from hunger and overstimulation, her aunt had pulled her aside and suggested that maybe it would be better if she took him home so the other guests could enjoy themselves. Sarah had left in tears, feeling humiliated and angry. The second wedding had been a colleague's destination wedding in Florida. Sarah had called ahead to ask about accessibility, dietary accommodations, and whether bringing would be appropriate. The bride had been polite but clearly uncomfortable, eventually suggesting that perhaps Sarah should enjoy the wedding as a break from her responsibilities and leave with a sitter. The implication was clear: her son wasn't really welcome. Sarah had declined the invitation altogether. These experiences had taught her to be careful, to ask questions before committing, and to protect both herself and from situations where they might not be fully accepted. But this was Emma's wedding, her closest friend from college, someone she had shared countless memories with. Surely Emma would be different. Surely Emma would understand and welcome both of them with open arms. Yet doubt gnawed at Sarah's confidence. She and Emma had drifted apart over the years, their communication reduced to occasional messages on social media and birthday wishes. Emma had pursued her career in corporate law, traveling the world, living in expensive cities, dating successful men. Her social media posts showed a glamorous life filled with restaurant openings, charity galas, and exotic vacations. Meanwhile, Sarah's life had become consumed with therapy appointments, medical bills, IEP meetings at school, and the daily challenges of single parenthood to a child with special needs. His father had left when was only 18 months old. The diagnosis had come 3 months before that and hadn't been able to handle it. He had wanted a normal life, he said. He had wanted a child who could play soccer, who didn't require constant medical attention, who fit into his vision of what family should look like. The divorce had been quick, and visits had become increasingly rare until they stopped altogether. Now, he sent a check each month and nothing more. No calls, no birthday cards, no interest in the amazing little boy he had abandoned. Sarah had learned to do it all on her own. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, which allowed her flexibility to attend numerous appointments and therapy sessions. Money was always tight, but they managed. She had become an expert at navigating insurance companies, finding resources, connecting with support groups, and building a network of other parents who understood her journey. She had become stronger than she ever imagined possible, but she had also become more isolated from her old life and old friends who didn't understand her new reality. She looked down at the invitation again. There was a small card enclosed that read, "While we love your little ones, this will be an adults-only celebration. We hope you understand and can enjoy an evening of grown-up fun." Sarah's stomach twisted. Adults only. She had seen these cards before, understood the reasoning behind them. Couples wanted an elegant evening without crying bobbies or rowdy toddlers disrupting the ceremony. She didn't necessarily disagree with the concept in principle. But for her, this policy presented an impossible situation. She had no one to leave with. Her parents had passed away in a car accident when she was in college, one of the tragedies that had bonded her so closely with Emma, who had been there for her during that dark time. She had no siblings. His parents had never been involved. Her friends from the neighborhood were lovely, but asking someone to care for an entire weekend required someone trained in his specific needs, someone who knew how to help him with his braces, someone who understood his communication style, someone who could handle an emergency. There were respite care services, of course, but they were expensive and required booking months in advance. Sarah's budget was already stretched thin, and beyond the logistics there was the emotional reality: had severe separation anxiety. After his father left, he had developed a deep fear of being abandoned. Leaving him with strangers, even professional caregivers, caused him tremendous stress. Sarah had tried it twice for necessary work commitments, and both times had been inconsolable, leading to panic attacks that left them both emotionally devastated for days afterward. The bottom line was simple: if she wanted to attend Emma's wedding, would need to come with her. But asking for an exception to the adults-only policy felt terrifying. What if Emma said no? What if Emma made her feel the way her cousin's wedding had made her feel? What if their friendship couldn't survive this request? Sarah sat down on the couch and immediately noticed the change in her demeanor. Despite his physical challenges, he was incredibly emotionally intelligent, always attuned to his mother's feelings. He abandoned his blocks and wheeled his small chair over to her, reaching up to take her hand. "Mama sad?" he asked, his words slightly slurred but clear enough for her to understand perfectly. She smiled and squeezed his hand. "Mama's okay, baby, just thinking about something." "What thing?" he persisted, his brown eyes so earnest and caring that she felt tears prick her own eyes. "Remember Aunt Emma from the pictures?" Sarah asked. She had shown photos of her college days, wanting him to know about the life she had before him, the friendships that had shaped her. Nodded enthusiastically. "Pretty lady, yellow dress." Sarah laughed despite herself. He had remembered a single photo from 2 years ago where Emma wore a yellow sundress at a mutual friend's garden party, the last time Sarah had actually seen her in person. "Yes, that's her. Well, she's getting married and she invited Mama to the wedding." His face lit up with genuine excitement. "Wedding, like princess?" His understanding of weddings came entirely from animated movies where they were portrayed as magical celebrations filled with dancing and cake. "Yes, like a princess wedding," Sarah agreed. "But here's the thing, buddy, the invitation says it's only for grown-ups, no kids allowed." Smile faltered and Sarah watched as he processed this information. "Me not go?" he asked quietly. "Well, that's what Mama needs to figure out," she said carefully. "Because here's the thing, I don't want to go anywhere without you. We're a team, remember, but I need to ask Aunt Emma if it's okay for you to come with me, and I'm a little bit nervous about asking." "Why nervous?" Tilted his head, genuinely confused. In his world, his mother was the bravest, strongest person alive. He couldn't imagine her being afraid of anything. How could she explain it to a 7-year-old? How could she make him understand that sometimes the world saw him as an inconvenience, a disruption, something to be excluded rather than welcomed? She had worked so hard to build his confidence, to make him feel valued and loved and important. She couldn't burden him with the harsh reality that not everyone would see him the way she did. "Sometimes grown-ups have special parties where they don't have room for kids," she said finally, choosing her words carefully. "And I need to ask Aunt Emma if maybe she can make an exception for you because you're so special and so important to me." Considered this seriously. What if she says no? "Then Mama probably won't go," Sarah said honestly, "because I'd rather stay home with you than go to any party without you." Shook his head firmly. "No, Mama, you go, you need fun, you always with me, you need friends." His words broke her heart. At 7 years old, her son was already worried about her social life, already feeling like he was holding her back. She pulled him into a tight hug, blinking back tears. "You are my best friend," she whispered into his hair, "and any place that doesn't want you there isn't some place I want to be." But even as she said it, she felt the weight of truth in his words. She did need connections outside of their tiny world of two. She did need to maintain friendships, to have adult conversations, to remember the person she was beyond being's mother and caregiver. And Emma had been such an important part of her life once. Maybe their friendship could be rekindled. Maybe Emma could be someone who understood, who welcomed them both. That evening, after was asleep, Sarah sat at her laptop and opened her email. She typed Emma's address into the recipient line and then stared at the blank message box for a long time. How did she even begin this conversation? How could she explain her situation without sounding like she was asking for pity? How could she make Emma understand how important this was without putting too much pressure on her? Finally, she began to type. "Dear Emma, congratulations on your engagement. I was so happy to receive your wedding invitation. I can't believe my best friend from college is getting married. It seems like just yesterday we were pulling all-nighters in the library and eating terrible dorm food. I would absolutely love to celebrate this special day with you. However, I need to discuss something with you before I can RSVP, and I hope you'll understand my situation." She paused, reading over those lines, too formal, too apologetic. She deleted it and started again. "Hey Emma, OMG, you're getting married. I'm so excited for you. Listen, I got your invitation and would love to be there, but I need to ask you something first." Better, more casual, but maybe too casual for such a serious request. Sarah spent 2 hours drafting and redrafting the email, trying to find the right tone, the right words, the right balance between explaining her needs and respecting Emma's wishes for her wedding. She explained about his condition, about her situation as a single mother without options. She was honest about her previous experiences at other weddings, about her fears and hesitations. She made it clear that she would completely understand if Emma said no, that she wouldn't take it personally, that she just needed to ask. Finally, at nearly midnight, she pressed send before she could second-guess herself again. The email disappeared into the digital void and Sarah sat back in her chair, exhaling deeply. Now all she could do was wait for Emma's response and hope that their old friendship still held the understanding and compassion she remembered. The next 3 days were agonizing. Sarah checked her email obsessively, her stomach churning with anxiety every time her phone chimed with a notification. She tried to distract herself with work, with playing with household chores, but the waiting gnawed at her constantly. What was Emma thinking? Was she annoyed by the request? Was she trying to figure out how to say no politely? Had she simply decided not to respond at all? Noticed her distraction and kept asking about Aunt Emma wedding, which made Sarah feel even worse. She had involved him in this emotionally, and now if Emma rejected them, they would both feel the sting of exclusion. She began to regret sending the email at all. Maybe she should have just politely declined the invitation without explanation. Maybe she had put Emma in an uncomfortable position. On the fourth day, Sarah was working on a logo design for a client when her phone buzzed with an email notification. She glanced at the screen and her heart stopped. The sender was Emma Richardson. Her hands shook slightly as she opened the message, scanning the words quickly at first, and then reading more slowly, her emotions cascading from fear to confusion to something she couldn't quite identify. Emma's email began warmly. "Sarah, it's so wonderful to hear from you. Thank you for reaching out and for being honest with me about your situation. I had no idea about everything you've been going." Emma's words seemed to leap off the screen as Sarah read them carefully, her heart pounding in her chest. The email continued. "I completely understand your situation, and I want you to know that I've given this a lot of thought since receiving your message. James and I discussed it at length last night." James was a man Sarah had never met but had seen in numerous photos online. He was handsome, successful, and seemed to make Emma genuinely happy based on the way she smiled in every picture with him. Sarah scrolled down, almost afraid to read what came next. Emma wrote, "The adults-only decision wasn't made lightly. We've been to so many weddings where children disrupted ceremonies or where parents spent the whole reception managing their kids instead of enjoying themselves. We wanted our wedding to be elegant and sophisticated, a celebration where our friends could relax and have fun without worrying about little ones. I hope you can understand that perspective." Sarah's stomach sank. This was the gentle letdown, the explanation before the rejection. She had heard variations of this reasoning before, and while she understood the logic for typical situations, her situation was anything but typical. She couldn't just hire a babysitter for the evening and enjoy a night out. Her reality was far more complicated than Emma seemed to understand. But then Emma's email took an unexpected turn. "However, your email really made me think about what adults only actually means and who it might unintentionally exclude. After talking with James and doing some research about cerebral palsy, we realized that your situation is completely different from parents who just don't want to arrange for the evening. isn't a toddler who might throw a tantrum or run around during the ceremony. He's a 7-year-old boy who requires his mother's care, and more importantly, he's your family. The whole point of our wedding is to celebrate with the people we love, and you've been one of my closest friends, even though we've been terrible at staying in touch." Sarah's eyes began to fill with tears as she continued reading. Emma wrote, "So here's what James and I want to say. Yes, Sarah, please bring to our wedding. We would be honored to have both of you there. And I need to apologize because by sending that adults-only card, I made you feel like you had to ask permission to bring your son when really you should have felt automatically welcome. That's on me and I'm sorry." The tears spilled over now, running down Sarah's cheeks as relief and gratitude washed over her. But Emma wasn't finished. The email continued with even more unexpected generosity. "I want to make sure you and are completely comfortable at the wedding, so please let me know what accommodations he needs. Is the venue wheelchair accessible? Does he have dietary restrictions? Would it help to have a quiet space available if he needs a break from the festivities? I want to make sure we plan for everything so you can both enjoy the day without any stress." Sarah sat back in her chair, overwhelmed by Emma's thoughtfulness. This wasn't just a reluctant yes or a begrudging exception. This was a genuine welcome and embrace of both her and her son. Emma had taken the time to educate herself, to understand the situation, and to proactively think about how to make them comfortable. It was more than Sarah had dared to hope for. She wiped her eyes and immediately began typing a response, her fingers flying across the keyboard as emotions poured out. She thanked Emma profusely, explained specific needs in detail, and expressed how much this invitation meant to her. She shared how isolated she had felt over the years, how difficult it had been to maintain friendships while navigating single parenthood and special needs caregiving. She admitted how scared she had been to send that first email, fearing rejection and judgment. Emma responded within an hour, and their email exchange quickly shifted from logistics to a genuine reconnection. Emma shared about her own life, admitting that while her career appeared glamorous on social media, she often felt lonely and disconnected. She had been working such long hours trying to make partner at her law firm that she had neglected many of her friendships, including the one with Sarah. She expressed genuine remorse about not being there for Sarah during some of the hardest years of her life. Over the next several days, their conversation continued through emails, text messages, and eventually phone calls. It felt like the old days, staying up late talking about everything and nothing. Emma asked questions about with genuine interest, wanting to know about his personality, his interests, his challenges, and his victories. Sarah in turn learned about James, about Emma's work stress, about the wedding planning chaos, and about Emma's own anxieties about marriage and the future. One evening, during a particularly long phone call, Emma said something that struck Sarah deeply. "You know, Sarah, hearing about your life and has really put things in perspective for me. I've been stressing about whether the napkins match the tablecloths and whether the band is better than a DJ, and you're dealing with actual important things every single day. You're dealing with advocating for your son's education, managing medical appointments, fighting with insurance companies, all while working and being an amazing mom. You're honestly my hero." Sarah felt uncomfortable with the praise. "I'm not a hero, Emma, I'm just doing what any mother would do." "But that's not true though, is it?" Emma pressed gently. "Because father didn't do it, he walked away. And I'm sure you've encountered plenty of people over the years who made things harder instead of easier for you, and you chose to show up every day, to fight every battle, to put your son's needs first even when it meant sacrificing your own comfort and social life. That takes incredible strength." They talked about abandonment, something Sarah rarely discussed with anyone. Emma listened without judgment as Sarah described the betrayal she had felt, the anger, the heartbreak of watching her marriage crumble under the weight of their son's diagnosis. Emma shared her own fears about marriage, about whether James would stick around when things got hard, whether their love could weather real storms. "I think that's why I want you at my wedding so much," Emma admitted. "You represent something real to me. You've survived something that would have destroyed a lot of people, and you came out the other side still kind, still loving, still fighting for what matters. I need that energy at my wedding. I need to be reminded of what actual commitment and love look like." As the wedding approached, Emma continued to check in regularly, making sure every detail was arranged for comfort. She had worked with the venue to ensure there was a ramp at the entrance and that table placement would be on an easily accessible level floor. She had coordinated with the caterer to prepare a special meal that met dietary needs. She had even designated a quiet room where Sarah could take if he needed a break from the noise and stimulation of the reception. But what touched Sarah most was when Emma asked if might want to participate in the wedding somehow. "I know he's young and the ceremony might be long for him, but would he maybe want to be involved somehow? James and I would love to include him if it's something he'd be comfortable with." Sarah was stunned. She had never imagined being part of the actual ceremony. "What did you have in mind?" she asked cautiously. Well, we were thinking about having a ring bearer, but most of the kids in our families are either too young or live too far away, Emma explained. Would maybe want to do it. He could use his wheelchair to come down the aisle, or if he prefers to walk with his braces, that would be beautiful too. Absolutely no pressure though. I just wanted to offer in case it's something he might enjoy. Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. Can I ask him and see what he says? That evening, Sarah sat down with and explained Emma's offer. At first, didn't fully understand what a ring bearer did, so Sarah showed him videos of wedding ceremonies online, explaining that he would have a very important job of bringing the rings to the bride and groom. His eyes grew wide with excitement. Me do important job, he asked, pointing to himself in disbelief. Yes, baby, Aunt Emma asked specifically for you because she thinks you're special and she wants you to be a big part of her wedding day. His face lit up with a joy Sarah hadn't seen in months. He immediately wanted to practice, insisting on using his toy rings to rehearse walking down their apartment hallway over and over again. He asked a million questions about what he would wear, whether he would meet a real princess, whether there would be cake, and whether Aunt Emma would really be happy to see him. She's going to be so happy to see you, Sarah assured him, blinking back tears. She can't wait to meet you. The week before the wedding, Emma called with unexpected news. So I've been thinking, she began, and Sarah could hear both excitement and nervousness in her voice. My bachelorette party's this weekend, and I know it's last minute, but I would really love it if you could come. I know you'd need to bring, and I know it might not be conventional to have a 7-year-old at a bachelorette party, but honestly my bridesmaids are doing a pretty low-key thing. We're going to a spa for massages and facials, then having dinner at this great Italian restaurant, and then probably just hanging out at my apartment watching movies and drinking wine. I think might actually enjoy the spa part, and I promise the movie portion won't be anything inappropriate. Sarah hesitated. A bachelorette party within tow, it seemed like a recipe for awkwardness. Emma, that's incredibly sweet, but I don't want to impose on your celebration. That's supposed to be your time with your girlfriends. You are my girlfriend, Sarah, Emma insisted. One of my oldest and dearest friends, and honestly most of my bridesmaids are people I work with or James's friends' girlfriends. You're one of the few people who actually knows me, the real me from before I became this stressed-out lawyer. Please come, and bring. I've told all the girls about him and they're all excited to meet him. Sarah talked it over with, who was enthusiastic about the idea of a spa. Like the princess movie, he exclaimed, referencing a scene in one of his favorite animated films where the characters visited a spa. Sarah made sure to call the spa ahead of time to explain his needs and ensure they could accommodate him. The staff was wonderful, assuring her they had experience with clients with various accessibility needs and would make sure was comfortable. The bachelorette party turned out to be one of the most surprisingly wonderful days Sarah had experienced in years. The bridesmaids, rather than being annoyed by his presence, were completely charmed by him. He giggled through his first facial, declaring it slimy but fun, and loved having his feet massaged during a pedicure. The women asked him thoughtful questions, listened patiently to his responses even when his speech was difficult to understand, and treated him with genuine kindness and interest. At dinner, was thrilled with the pasta specially prepared to meet his dietary needs, and he entertained the table with his observations about wedding planning which he had absorbed from watching Sarah and Emma's preparations. When he announced seriously that weddings need cake and princesses and no bad guys, the entire table erupted in laughter, and Emma raised her glass in agreement. Later, back at Emma's beautiful apartment, while dozed on the couch wrapped in a soft blanket, the women talked more seriously about life, relationships, and the future. Emma's bridesmaids asked Sarah about her experience as a single mother, about raising a child with special needs, and about how she managed everything. Sarah found herself opening up in ways she hadn't in years, sharing both the challenges and the incredible joys that brought to her life. One of the bridesmaids, a woman named Jennifer who worked with Emma, said something that stayed with Sarah. You know, I've been so focused on my career, thinking I need to have everything perfect before I even consider having kids. But listening to you talk about and seeing how much love you have for him, even though your circumstances aren't perfect, it makes me realize that maybe perfect isn't the point. Maybe love and commitment are what matter. The conversation shifted to Emma's upcoming marriage, her fears and hopes. Sarah found herself offering advice based on her own failed marriage, talking about the importance of communication, of showing up even when things are hard, of remembering why you chose each other in the first place. Emma listened intently, occasionally glancing over at sleeping peacefully on her couch. I want what you have, Emma said quietly at one point. Sarah laughed. Trust me, you don't want a failed marriage and single parenthood. No, Emma shook her head firmly. I mean the way you love, the way you show up, the way you fight for what matters. That's what I want in my marriage. That's the kind of partner I want to be for James and the kind of partner I hope he'll be for me. The night ended with Sarah gathering a sleepy and preparing to leave. Emma walked them to the door, hugging Sarah tightly. "Thank you for coming tonight," she whispered. Having here, it made everything feel more real and more right. This is what I want my life to look like, surrounded by people I actually care about, not just putting on a show." As Sarah drove home with sleeping in the backseat, she felt a profound sense of gratitude and hope. Maybe friendship could survive distance and different life paths. Maybe people could grow and change and come back together. Maybe asking for what she needed, even when it felt scary, could lead to connection instead of rejection. The day before the wedding, Emma texted Sarah with one final request. "Would you and want to come to the rehearsal dinner tomorrow? I know it's family only officially, but you're family to me, and needs to practice his ring bearer walk anyway, so it makes sense for you both to be there." Sarah accepted, and the rehearsal dinner became another beautiful evening of connection and welcome. James proved to be exactly as wonderful as Emma had described, going out of his way to connect with, getting down on his level to talk about superheroes and showing genuine interest in his opinions about the wedding setup. Took his ring bearer responsibilities very seriously, practicing his walk down the aisle multiple times until he felt confident. Emma's family and James's family were equally welcoming, treating with kindness and making sure Sarah felt included in all the festivities. Emma's mother pulled Sarah aside at one point and said, "Emma has told me so much about you and your beautiful boy. I'm so glad you're here." Emma needs good friends who keep her grounded, who remind her what really matters in life. That night, as Sarah tucked into bed at their hotel room near the wedding venue, he looked up at her with his serious brown eyes and asked, "Mama, why are people so nice?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "At other places, people stare, people whisper, you get sad face," he explained with the blunt honesty of a 7-year-old. "But here, everyone's smiling at me, everyone talking to me. Why?" Sarah felt her heart crack open. She hadn't realized he noticed the difference, that he picked up on her sadness when they faced discrimination or exclusion. She chose her words carefully. "Some people just don't understand that everyone is different and that different is okay. But Aunt Emma and her family and friends, they understand that what makes you special is exactly what makes you wonderful. They see you for who you really are, a smart, funny, kind boy, not just your wheelchair or your braces." Nodded thoughtfully, "I like them." "I like them too, baby," Sarah agreed, kissing his forehead. The morning of the wedding arrived with perfect autumn weather. The Vermont countryside was ablaze with fall colors, the trees displaying brilliant reds, oranges, and golds against a crystal blue sky. Sarah woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Today wasn't just about attending a wedding. It was about participating in a significant way, about being fully included and celebrated rather than merely tolerated. The weight of that acceptance felt both wonderful and slightly terrifying. Was already awake when Sarah opened her eyes, sitting up in his bed and staring out the window at the colorful trees. "Big day, Mama," he announced solemnly, as if he were preparing for the most important mission of his young life. Sarah couldn't help but smile at his serious expression. "Yes, baby, very big day. Are you excited or nervous?" Considered the question carefully, a habit he had developed that Sarah found endlessly endearing. He always took his time with feelings, trying to identify them accurately. "Both," he finally decided. "Excited for cake, nervous for walking." They had practiced the ring bearer walk countless times, but Sarah understood his anxiety. The actual ceremony would be different from their rehearsals. There would be many eyes watching him, a long aisle to navigate, and the pressure of carrying something important. She sat down on his bed and took his hand. "You know what? Even if something goes wrong, even if you drop the rings or need help walking, everyone there is going to love you just the same. Aunt Emma asked you to be part of her wedding because she thinks you're amazing, not because she needs you to be perfect. Nobody is perfect, not even at weddings." Nodded, absorbing this wisdom. "What if I fall?" "Then we help you up and we keep going," Sarah said simply. "That's what people who love each other do, they help each other up when they fall." This seemed to satisfy him and his face brightened. "Okay, now we get fancy." Getting ready took longer than Sarah had anticipated. Needed help with his dress clothes, and they had to make sure his leg braces were properly adjusted under his little suit pants. Emma had arranged for the suit to be specially tailored, so it would fit comfortably over his braces without drawing attention to them. Another thoughtful detail that had brought Sarah to tears when she first saw it. The suit was a miniature version of what the groomsmen would wear, making look incredibly grown-up and handsome. Sarah had splurged on a new dress for herself, the first new formal wear she had purchased since before was born. It was a deep emerald green that complemented her auburn hair, elegant but not flashy. as she applied her makeup carefully, watched from his wheelchair with great interest. "You look like Princess too, Mama," he declared with absolute certainty. "Just a mama in a pretty dress," Sarah corrected gently, but she felt beautiful for the first time in years. Not because of the dress or the makeup, but because of the joy and pride shining in her son's eyes as he looked at her. They arrived at the wedding venue 2 hours before the ceremony, as Emma had requested. The estate where the wedding was being held was breathtaking, a restored historic mansion surrounded by manicured gardens and overlooking a small lake. The accessibility Emma had promised was evident immediately, with ramps seamlessly integrated into the landscape design and wide pathways that easily accommodated his wheelchair. Emma greeted them at the entrance, already dressed in her wedding gown. She looked absolutely stunning, like something from a fairy tale magazine. The dress was classic and elegant, with delicate lace details and a flowing train, but what struck Sarah most was the genuine joy on Emma's face when she saw them. "You're here," Emma exclaimed, rushing over despite her elaborate dress. She bent down to level. "And look at you, handsome, are you ready for your very important job?" Nodded eagerly, suddenly shy in the presence of this princess-like figure. "I practiced a lot," he managed to say. "I heard about that," Emma said warmly. "James told me you're going to do an amazing job. Do you want to see where you'll walk? We can practice one more time if it would make you feel better." They spent the next 20 minutes going over the ceremony details. The wedding coordinator, a kind woman named, showed exactly where he would stand, where he would walk, and where he would hand over the rings. She treated him with the same professional courtesy she gave all the wedding party members, never speaking down to him or treating him as less capable. Responded to this respect by taking his role very seriously, asking detailed questions about timing and positioning. Sarah watched from the side, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. This was what inclusion really looked like, not just allowing to be present but actively engaging him, respecting him, and helping him succeed. Emma caught her eye at one point and mouthed, "Thank you for being here," and Sarah felt tears threatening her carefully applied mascara. The ceremony began promptly at 3 o'clock. Sarah had been given a seat of honor in the third row, close enough to see everything but not so prominent that she felt uncomfortable. As the music started and the processional began, her hands gripped the edge of her seat. This was it, would be walking down that aisle in front of over 200 guests. The bridesmaids came first, walking gracefully in their coordinated dresses. Then the music changed to a softer, more whimsical tune and gave his cue. Sarah held her breath as her son began his journey down the aisle. He had chosen to walk using his braces rather than his wheelchair, determined to meet this challenge on his own 2 feet. Sight of her small, brave boy making his way down that long aisle, concentrating so hard on each step, carrying the ring pillow with such careful attention, was almost more than Sarah could bear. She pressed her hand to her mouth, fighting back tears, but what truly overwhelmed her was the reaction of the guests. Rather than staring with pity or discomfort, the assembled crowd watched with warm smiles and obvious admiration. Several people even had tears in their eyes, moved by his determination and seriousness. Made it halfway down the aisle when his left leg brace caught slightly on the edge of a decorative runner. Sarah's heart stopped as she saw him wobble, but before she could even move, James, who had been standing at the altar with the officiant, stepped forward. He walked calmly down the aisle, bent down to level, and Sarah could see him saying something that made smile. Then James offered his arm, and together they walked the rest of the way to the front, James matching slower pace perfectly. When they reached the altar, James shook hand formally, man to man, and took the ring pillow. The entire congregation applauded, a warm and genuine appreciation for his accomplishment. Quickly helped to a special seat that had been set up near Sarah's row where he could watch the rest of the ceremony comfortably. As settled into his seat next to his mother, he whispered loudly enough for those nearby to hear, "I did it, Mama, and James helped me not fall." "You were perfect, baby," Sarah whispered back, squeezing his hand. Around them, several guests smiled at the exchange, and Sarah felt a sense of belonging she hadn't experienced in years. The ceremony itself was beautiful and meaningful. Emma and James had written their own vows, and as Sarah listened to them, promised to support each other through challenges, to show up even when things were difficult, to choose each other every day, she found herself crying openly. These weren't tears of sadness for her own failed marriage, but tears of hope for her friend's future, and gratitude for the kindness Emma and James had shown her. And during the vows, Emma's eyes found Sarah's in the crowd, and there was a moment of understanding between them. Emma had told Sarah the night before that having her there, seeing her strength and resilience, had influenced the vows she had written. "You showed me what real commitment looks like," Emma had said, "not just staying when things are easy but fighting for what matters when things get hard." When the ceremony concluded and Emma and James were pronounced married, the crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Clapped enthusiastically along with everyone else, his earlier nervousness completely forgotten in the joy of the moment. As the newlyweds walked back down the aisle together, Emma paused at seat and bent down to give him a quick hug. "Thank you for being part of my special day," she told him, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You were the best ring bearer ever." The reception was held in a beautifully decorated barn on the estate property, transformed into an elegant yet warm celebration space. Emma and the wedding coordinator had thoughtfully arranged the seating so that table was near the exit, giving Sarah easy access to the quiet room Emma had mentioned if needed a break. But they were also close to the dance floor and the main action, ensuring they didn't feel relegated to a corner. Sarah was surprised and touched to find that their table included some of Emma's closest friends and family, people who had made an effort during the rehearsal dinner to connect with both her and. The conversation flowed easily, and charmed the entire table with his observations about the wedding decorations, which he declared were very fancy but need more superheroes. The food was exceptional, and special meal was served without fanfare, just as naturally as everyone else's dinner. The caterer had even made a point to check with Sarah directly to ensure everything was prepared correctly. These small considerations, these moments of inclusion and thoughtfulness, accumulated throughout the evening to create an experience that felt genuinely welcoming rather than merely accommodating. When dinner concluded and the dancing began, Sarah assumed she and would sit out that portion of the evening. Could move to music in his own way, but traditional dancing was challenging for him, and she didn't want him to feel left out or different. But Emma had other plans. After the traditional first dance and parent dances, Emma came directly to their table. She said, extending her hand to him, "Would you give me the honor of a dance?" Looked uncertain, glancing at his mother. "I don't dance good," he admitted quietly. "Dancing isn't about being good or bad," Emma said gently. "It's just about moving to music and having fun, and since you were such an important part of my ceremony, I would really love to dance with you. We can dance however you want, whatever feels comfortable for you." Sarah helped stand with his braces, and Emma took his hands. They swayed together to the music, Emma following his lead in his pace. When he got tired after half a song, James appeared with his wheelchair and sat while Emma pushed him around the dance floor in circles, both of them laughing. Other guests joined in, creating a circle around them and clapping along to the music, turning the moment into a celebration rather than something that might have felt like pity or special treatment. Watching her son's face light up with pure joy as he spun around the dance floor with the bride, surrounded by smiling, accepting people, Sarah felt something shift inside her. For years, she had protected by limiting their exposure to situations where he might face rejection or judgment. She had built walls around their little family of two, convinced that the world outside was too harsh, too unkind. But this experience was showing her another possibility. Maybe there were people who would welcome them, include them, celebrate them. Maybe she had been so focused on avoiding pain that she had also avoided connection. As the evening continued, Sarah found herself actually relaxing and enjoying the party. She danced with some of Emma's friends, had genuine conversations with people who asked about her life with interest rather than pity, and even laughed until her sides hurt when led a conga line of enthusiastic wedding guests, his wheelchair at the front as James pushed him around the barn. Late in the evening, after had fallen asleep in Sarah's lap at their table, Emma and James came over to sit with them for a few minutes. Emma looked radiant despite the long day, her happiness almost tangible in the air around her. "I can't thank you enough for being here," Emma said, reaching over to squeeze Sarah's hand. "Having you in here made this day exactly what I wanted it to be, real, meaningful, surrounded by people who matter." James nodded in agreement. "You know, when Emma first told me about your situation and her decision to make an exception to our adults-only policy, I'll be honest, I had reservations. I thought it might be complicated or create problems." He held up his hand as Sarah started to speak. "But I was wrong, completely wrong. Having here, seeing his joy and his courage, watching him participate so fully in our ceremony, it made everything better. He reminded all of us what really matters." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. "You both have been so incredibly kind to us. You've made feel special and valued, and you've made me feel like I have friends again. I can't tell you how much that means." "You know what struck me tonight?" Emma said thoughtfully. "Watching all our guests interact with, seeing how he brought out the best in people made them kinder and more genuine. Several of my work colleagues who are usually so formal and guarded were getting down on the floor to talk with him, laughing at his jokes, genuinely connecting. He has this gift of cutting through all the pretense and bringing out what's real in people." James added, "And watching you with him, Sarah, the way you advocate for him and support him while also letting him challenge himself and grow, it's inspired me. Emma and I have talked about having kids someday, and honestly, I've been scared. Scared of screwing up, scared of something going wrong. But seeing you handle real challenges with such grace and love, it makes me less afraid. It reminds me that parenting isn't about everything being perfect. It's about showing up with love no matter what. They sat together quietly for a while, watching the last of the wedding guests dancing and celebrating. Emma's head rested on James's shoulder and Sarah held her sleeping son, and there was a comfortable peace between them all. Finally, Emma spoke again, her voice soft but serious. Sarah, I want you to know that this isn't just a wedding day thing. I don't want us to go back to barely keeping in touch. I want you and in our lives, really in our lives. James and I are going to be moving back to this area after our honeymoon. My firm is opening a new office here and I'm going to be heading it up. We'll only be about 30 minutes from where you live. Sarah's eyes widened in surprise. Really? I didn't know you were moving back. I haven't announced it widely yet, Emma explained. But yes, we're coming home, and I'm hoping that means we can really rebuild our friendship. Regular dinners when we eventually have kids, being part of each other's actual lives instead of just social media updates. What do you say? I would love that, Sarah managed to say through her tears. I would really, really love that. As Sarah carefully carried out to their car later that night, James helping with wheelchair and equipment, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just a few weeks. She had gone from feeling isolated and excluded to feeling connected and celebrated. She had gone from protecting from potential rejection to watching him thrive in an environment of genuine acceptance. She had gone from believing their little family of two had to face the world alone to having real friends who wanted to be part of their journey. The drive home was peaceful, sleeping soundly in the back seat, still wearing his handsome suit. Sarah kept glancing at him in the mirror, her heart full of love and hope. She thought about the question he had asked the night before, why are people so nice? She had given him an answer about understanding and acceptance, but now she had a deeper understanding herself. People were nice when they took the time to see beyond surface differences, when they chose to lead with compassion rather than judgment, when they recognized that inclusion wasn't about special treatment but about basic human dignity. Emma and James had chosen to see not as an inconvenience or a complication, but as a person worthy of celebration and inclusion. That choice had created ripples throughout the entire wedding, influencing how other guests interacted with and ultimately enriching the entire experience for everyone present. The weeks following Emma's wedding felt like a dream that Sarah was almost afraid to wake from. The morning after the wedding, she had woken up to a text message from Emma with photos from the ceremony and reception, including several beautiful shots of in his ring bearer role and dancing with Emma. The message read, "Thank you again for making our day so special. These photos are some of my favorites from the whole wedding. Can't wait to see you both again soon." Sarah had set one of the photos as her phone's wallpaper, a candid shot of beaming with pride as he stood at the altar with the ring pillow. Every time she looked at it, she felt a surge of gratitude and hope, but she also felt something else, something more complicated. The wedding had opened her eyes to how much she and had been missing by staying isolated in their protected bubble. She began to wonder what other opportunities she might have declined or avoided out of fear. Meanwhile, couldn't stop talking about the wedding. He recounted every detail to anyone who would listen, from his teachers at school to the therapists at his weekly appointments to the checkout clerk at the grocery store. I was ring bearer, he would announce proudly. Very important job, everyone clapped for me. His confidence had noticeably grown, his shoulders a little, his smile a little brighter. Sarah realized that being included and celebrated in such a significant event had impacted him profoundly. At school, his teacher, Mrs. Henderson, pulled Sarah aside one afternoon. I don't know what happened last weekend, but has been like a different child this week. He's been more engaged in class, more willing to try new things, and he's been talking about the wedding nonstop. He even volunteered to give a presentation to the class about weddings and being a ring bearer. That's huge for him. He usually avoids speaking in front of the group because he's self-conscious about his speech. Sarah explained about the wedding and Emma's inclusive approach. Mrs. Henderson nodded thoughtfully. It's amazing what happens when children feel genuinely valued and included. Has always been bright and capable, but sometimes his confidence holds him back. This experience seems to have shown him that he can do hard things and that people will celebrate him, not just tolerate him. That's a powerful lesson. That conversation stuck with Sarah. She began to reconsider her approach to social life and her own. She had been so focused on protecting him from negative experiences that she had inadvertently limited his exposure to positive ones as well. Maybe it was time to take more risks, to seek out opportunities for connection rather than retreating from them. When Emma called 2 weeks after the wedding to invite them to dinner at her and James's new house, Sarah accepted immediately. The evening turned out to be wonderfully relaxed and comfortable. James had set up an elaborate building block station complete with specialized grips that made it easier for her to manipulate the pieces. Emma had prepared a meal that accommodated dietary needs without making a big production of it. They ate, talked, laughed, and it felt natural, like family. During dinner, Emma brought up something that had been on her mind. Sarah, I've been thinking a lot since the wedding about accessibility and inclusion, not just for kids but in general. At work, I've realized that our office building has all these barriers that probably make it difficult or impossible for people with disabilities to even apply for jobs with us. I want to change that. I want to do better. But I need help understanding what barriers exist and how to remove them. Sarah was surprised but intrigued. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about forming a committee to review our accessibility policies and practices, Emma explained. And I'm hoping you might consider consulting with us. You have such valuable perspective from navigating the world with. You see barriers that people like me don't even notice because they don't affect us. I would pay you for your time and expertise, of course. This wouldn't be charity or a favor. This would be actual paid consulting work. Sarah's mind raced. Consulting work. She had never considered herself an expert on accessibility, but Emma had a point. She had spent years identifying barriers, finding workarounds, and advocating for changes in various settings. She had become an expert without even realizing it. I'm interested, she said carefully, but I want to make sure I would actually be helpful and not just someone you're trying to help by giving work to. James jumped in. Sarah, trust me, Emma doesn't do anything out of charity when it comes to work. She's ruthlessly practical. If she's asking you to consult, it's because she genuinely believes you have expertise we need. And from what I've seen of how you navigate the world with anticipating challenges and finding solutions, I think you would be excellent at this. Over the next several weeks, Sarah began her consulting work with Emma's law firm. She conducted a comprehensive accessibility audit of their office building, identifying everything from the obvious physical barriers like stairs without ramps to less obvious issues like the height of reception counters, the lack of visual fire alarms for deaf employees, and the inaccessible restroom facilities. She reviewed their hearing practices, their employee policies, and their client intake procedures through an accessibility lens. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. Sarah found herself drawing on years of accumulated knowledge and experience. She thought about all the times she had struggled to enter a building with, all the times they had encountered unnecessarily difficult situations that could have been easily prevented with thoughtful design. Now she had the opportunity to help prevent those barriers for others. Emma was an enthusiastic champion of the accessibility initiative, and her genuine commitment inspired others in the firm to take it seriously as well. Sarah presented her findings to the firm's leadership team, a nerve-wracking experience that Emma helped her prepare for extensively. The presentation went better than Sarah had dared hope. The partners asked thoughtful questions, took her recommendations seriously, and approved a comprehensive plan to make the firm more accessible and inclusive. But the real turning point came when one of the senior partners approached Sarah after the presentation. Ms. Mitchell, he said, shaking her hand firmly, that was an eye-opening presentation. I've been practicing law for 30 years and I've never thought about these issues the way you laid them out. You made me realize that we've been unintentionally excluding talented people who could contribute to our firm. I want to thank you for that education, and I want to ask if you would consider doing similar work for other organizations. I sit on several nonprofit boards and I think they could all benefit from your expertise. Just like that, Sarah had the beginnings of a new career path. Word spread through Emma's professional network, and Sarah found herself being contacted by other organizations wanting accessibility consultations. She was able to raise her freelance graphic design rates and be more selective about those projects because she had this new income stream. For the first time since was born, she felt financially secure enough to breathe a little easier. But even more than the financial benefits, the work gave Sarah a sense of purpose beyond caregiving. She loved fiercely and wouldn't trade their relationship for anything, but she had lost some of her own identity in the all-consuming work of being his primary caregiver. This consulting work reminded her that she was Sarah, a capable professional with valuable expertise, not just mom. The increased income and flexible consulting schedule also allowed Sarah to make some changes in their daily life. She was able to hire a part-time aide who could help with care a few hours a week, giving Sarah some time to focus on her work or even occasionally have an evening to herself. The aide, a wonderful young woman named Jessica who was studying occupational therapy, bonded quickly with. Having another caring adult in their lives eased some of the pressure Sarah had been carrying alone for so long. Thrived with the additional attention and care. Jessica introduced him to new activities and exercises that complemented his regular therapy sessions. She took him to the park, helped him with homework, and played imaginative games that encouraged his development. His physical therapist even commented on his improved strength and coordination, attributing some of the progress to the consistent additional activity Jessica provided. One evening, about 2 months after the wedding, Sarah was working on a consultation report when Emma called. Hey, are you busy this weekend? James and I want to throw a little get-together at our place. Nothing fancy, just a barbecue with some friends. We're inviting people from work, some neighbors, and of course you, and I want you to meet more people. I want you to have a wider social circle. Sarah felt that old, familiar flutter of anxiety. A party with people she didn't know? New social situations had become so stressful over the years. But then she remembered the wedding, remembered how had blossomed with inclusion, remembered her own realization that she needed to take more risks. "We'd love to come," she heard herself say. The barbecue was everything Emma promised, casual and comfortable. Emma and James had clearly told their guests about ahead of time because no one stared or asked intrusive questions. People simply included him naturally in conversations, asked him about school and his interests, and adapted their interactions to his communication style without making it feel forced or unnatural. Sarah found herself talking with a diverse group of people, from Emma's law colleagues to their neighbors to James's friends from his book club. One woman, a high school teacher named Rachel, became particularly friendly. She asked thoughtful questions about education and shared some of her own experiences teaching students with various disabilities. By the end of the evening, she and Sarah had exchanged numbers and made plans to meet for coffee. Made friends too. A neighbor's son, a 9-year-old named Tyler, discovered that he and both loved the same superhero movies. Tyler didn't seem bothered by his wheelchair or his speech differences. He just saw another kid who wanted to talk about whether Captain America or Iron Man was cooler. They spent most of the party engaged in an intense debate about superhero rankings, building block towers, and watching his favorite animated movies on James's tablet. As Sarah watched, laugh and play with Tyler, as she listened to Rachel share a funny story from her classroom, as she accepted a beer from James and felt genuinely relaxed and happy, she realized something profound. This was what normal life could look like. Not a life where disability was ignored or minimized, but a life where it was simply one aspect of who they were, not the only thing that defined them or their relationships. On the drive home that night was unusually quiet. Sarah glanced at him in the mirror, concerned. "You okay, buddy? Did you have fun?" "Mama," said slowly, working through his words carefully. "Tyler wants me to come to his birthday party next month. He asked his mom and she said yes. Can I go?" Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. A birthday party invitation, such a simple, ordinary thing for most children, but something had rarely experienced. "Of course you can go, baby, that's so exciting." "And Mama," continued, "maybe we go to more parties, maybe we have more friends. I like having friends." "Me too, sweetheart," Sarah said, blinking back tears. "I like having friends too." The friendship with Rachel deepened over the following weeks. They met regularly for coffee, sometimes with and sometimes without when Jessica could watch him. Rachel was easy to talk to, funny and refreshingly honest about her own struggles. She was going through a divorce, dealing with her own challenges, and she appreciated having someone to talk to who understood that life wasn't always perfect or easy. Rachel introduced Sarah to other teachers from her school, and Sarah found herself part of a casual friend group for the first time in years. They had monthly dinners, sometimes including kids and sometimes adults, only when could be arranged. The conversation flowed easily, covering everything from politics to television shows to parenting challenges. Sarah's life was expanding in ways she hadn't anticipated. Through Emma's law firm work, Sarah met other parents of children with disabilities, forming connections based on shared experiences. They created an informal support group that met monthly, sharing resources, advice, and emotional support. Sarah realized how much she had been craving connection with people who understood her daily reality without her having to explain or justify it. One woman in the group had a teenage daughter with cerebral palsy who was thriving in high school despite significant physical challenges. Became something of a mentor to Sarah, showing her what's future might look like, the possibilities and opportunities that existed. "It won't always be easy," told her honestly, "but it can be full and rich and meaningful. Don't let fear limit his potential or yours." As fall turned to winter, Sarah received an unexpected email from his father. She hadn't heard from him beyond his monthly child support payments in over 2 years. The email was brief. "I saw some photos that were tagged of online from a wedding. He's gotten so big. How is he doing? Would it be possible to see him sometime?" Sarah's first instinct was anger. Where had been for the past years? What right did he have to suddenly want to be involved now? But as she sat with the email, showed it to Emma and Rachel, and discussed it with her therapist, she began to consider a more nuanced response. Asked about his father occasionally, usually triggered by seeing other kids with their dads at school events or in the neighborhood. Sarah had always been honest with him, explaining in age-appropriate ways that his father had made a choice to not be part of their lives, but that it wasn't his fault. She had never spoken ill of in front of, not wanting to burden her son with adult anger and resentment. Now was 7, old enough to have some say in whether he wanted to see his father. Sarah sat down with him one evening and showed him his email, reading it aloud since was still learning to read longer words. "Your dad wants to see you," Sarah explained carefully, But this is your choice. If you want to see him, we can arrange that. If you don't want to, that's okay too. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. Thought about it for a long time, his face serious. Will he stay this time? He finally asked. The question broke Sarah's heart. I don't know, baby. I can't promise that he will, but I can promise that I will always be here. I will never leave you. Can I think about it? Asked. Of course, take all the time you need. Decided after a few days that he wanted to meet his father, but he wanted his mother there with him. Sarah arranged a meeting at a neutral location, a child-friendly cafe near their apartment. She prepared herself for the encounter, reminding herself that this was not about her own hurt and anger. Looked older than she remembered, more tired. He seemed nervous as they sat down, struggling to make conversation with his son. Was polite but reserved, answering questions but not volunteering much. It was awkward and uncomfortable, and Sarah found herself filling the silences more than she wanted to. But then said something that surprised her. I need to tell you something. When you were little and the doctors told us about your cerebral palsy, I got scared. I didn't know how to be a dad to a kid with special needs. I thought I wouldn't be good enough, that I would mess everything up, so I ran away, and that was wrong. That was the worst decision I ever made. He turned to Sarah. I see the photos Emma posts sometimes, and I see what an amazing job you've done with him. I see how happy he looks, how confident, how loved, and I see what I missed out on by being a coward. Sarah didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to stay angry to protect herself and from potential future hurt. But another part of her recognized the courage it took for to admit his failures, to show up and try to make amends even when it would be easier to stay away. I'm not asking to jump back into his life like nothing happened, continued. I know I don't deserve that, but if you're both open to it, I'd like to try to build some kind of relationship with slowly, at whatever pace feels comfortable for you both, and I want to do better with child support too. I've been doing the minimum and that's not right. I want to contribute more and not just financially. I want to be involved if you'll let me. The conversation continued, and by the end they had agreed to try monthly supervised visits with the possibility of more frequent contact if things went well. Sarah was cautious, protective of Hardin. 6 months after Emma's wedding, Sarah found herself sitting in a coffee shop with her laptop, reviewing proposals for 3 different accessibility consulting projects. Her freelance graphic design business was still going strong, but the consulting work had become her primary focus and passion. She had developed a reputation for thorough, thoughtful analysis and practical recommendations. Organizations sought her out specifically, valuing her unique perspective and expertise. Emma walked in, spotted Sarah, and made her way over with 2 cups of coffee. Decaf for you, regular for me, she said, sliding into the seat across from Sarah. How's the Mitchell Accessibility Consulting empire growing? Sarah laughed. Empire might be overstating it, but I can't complain. I have more work than I can handle right now. I'm actually thinking about hiring someone to help with the administrative side of things. That's amazing, Sarah. Seriously, I'm so proud of you. Emma took a sip of her coffee. I have something I want to run by you. The firm is hosting a conference next month about creating more inclusive workplaces. We want you to be one of our keynote speakers. Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. Keynote speaker? Emma, I'm not a public speaker. I do assessments and write reports. You gave that presentation to our partners 6 months ago and it was powerful, Emma countered. People need to hear your story. They need to understand that accessibility isn't just about compliance with regulations. It's about recognizing the humanity and dignity of all people. You can communicate that in a way that changes hearts, not just policies. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. Speaking in front of a small conference room of partners was one thing. A keynote speech at a large conference was entirely different. I don't know, Emma, that's a lot of people staring at me, judging me. The same way you thought everyone would judge at the wedding, Emma said gently, but instead they celebrated him. Maybe it's time you let people celebrate you too. The idea terrified Sarah, but it also intrigued her. She had spent so many years hiding, protecting herself and from potential rejection. But the wedding had taught her that vulnerability could lead to connection, that taking risks could result in beautiful experiences. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe it was time to step further out of her comfort zone. She agreed to do the keynote speech and then immediately regretted it. For the next few weeks, she worked on her presentation with an intensity that bordered on obsession. She wrote and rewrote her speech dozens of times, practiced in front of her mirror, recorded herself to analyze her delivery, and had nightmares about forgetting her words in front of hundreds of people. noticed her stress and tried to help in his own 7-year-old way. He made her encouraging drawings, told her she was the best mama and the person, and even offered to come to the conference with her for support. His sweet attempts to make her feel better helped more than he could know. Rachel offered to watch during the conference, insisting that Sarah needed to focus on her presentation without worrying about logistics. This was another sign of how much Sarah's life had changed. She now had people she could trust with her son, people who understood his needs and genuinely cared about his. The night before the conference, Emma came over to Sarah's apartment for a final practice run. Sarah stood in her living room delivering her speech while Emma sat on the couch with a notepad offering feedback. When Sarah finished, Emma was wiping tears from her eyes. "That was perfect, Sarah. Don't change a thing. People are going to be moved by your story, by your journey from isolation to advocacy. You're not just talking about accessibility in abstract terms, you're showing them the real human impact of inclusion and exclusion." What if I freeze up there? What if people think I'm making too big a deal out of things? What if they think I'm just complaining? Sarah's insecurities tumbled out. Emma stood up and took Sarah's hands. "Listen to me, you are going to be amazing, and even if you weren't, even if you stumbled over every word, you would still be brave for trying. Just like was brave when he walked down that aisle at my wedding. Remember what you told him, that even if he fell you would help him up and keep going? Well, I'm here to help you up if you fall, but I don't think you will." The conference was held at a large hotel convention center downtown. Sarah arrived early, her hands trembling as she checked in and received her speaker badge. The conference schedule showed that her keynote was scheduled right after lunch, one of the prime speaking slots. Over 300 people were registered to attend. She spent the morning session sitting in the audience, trying to calm her nerves by listening to other speakers discuss various aspects of workplace inclusion. The presentations were informative but somewhat dry, focused heavily on legal requirements and compliance measures. Sarah began to understand what Emma had meant about her speech being different. She wasn't going to talk about laws and regulations. She was going to talk about life, about love, about the human cost of exclusion and the human benefit of genuine inclusion. During lunch, Sarah barely touched her food. Emma sat beside her, providing steady, calming support. James was there too, having taken the afternoon off work to attend Sarah's speech. Their presence helped, reminding Sarah that she had people in her corner, people who believed in her. Finally, it was time. The conference moderator introduced Sarah, reading her brief biography and explaining her work in accessibility consulting. Sarah walked to the podium on shaking legs, looked out at the sea of faces staring up at her, and felt her mind go blank. This was her nightmare come true. She couldn't remember her opening line, she couldn't remember anything. Then she saw Emma in the third row giving her a thumbs up and mouthing, "You've got this." Sarah took a deep breath, thought about and everything they had been through together, and found her voice. "7 months ago," she began, her voice stronger than she expected, "I received a wedding invitation that changed my life. Not because the wedding was particularly unusual, but because of a simple question I had to ask. Can I bring my son?" That question and the answer I received opened my eyes to how much I had been limiting my life and my son's life out of fear of rejection. She told them about his cerebral palsy, about being a single mother navigating a world that often felt designed to exclude them. She told them about the 2 previous weddings where they had been made to feel unwelcome. She told them about the courage it took to send that email to Emma, asking for an exception to the adults-only policy. "I was prepared for Emma to say no," Sarah continued. "I was prepared to be disappointed again, to add another rejection to the list, but instead Emma said yes. And not just yes, but how can I make sure you're both comfortable?" That simple shift from exclusion to inclusion changed everything. She described the wedding experience's role as ring bearer, the way guests embraced him rather than merely tolerating him. She explained how that experience had given confidence, had opened her eyes to the possibility of connection, and had ultimately led to her career in accessibility consulting. "But here's what I want you to understand," Sarah said, looking directly at her audience. "Inclusion isn't about charity. It's not about feeling sorry for people with disabilities or making exceptions out of pity. Inclusion is about recognizing that disability is a natural part of human diversity. It's about designing our spaces, our policies, and our communities in ways that allow everyone to participate fully." She shared specific examples from her consulting work, describing the barriers she had identified and the simple solutions that made enormous differences. She talked about the reception counter that was too high for wheelchair users to see over, fixed by creating a lower section at one end. She described the all-staff meetings held in a room without a wheelchair ramp, excluding disabled employees from important conversations, solved by simply changing the meeting location. She explained the online job application system that wasn't compatible with screen readers, preventing blind applicants from even applying, fixed by updating the website code. Every one of these barriers was unintentional, Sarah emphasized. No one woke up and decided to exclude people with disabilities, but the impact of unintentional exclusion is just as real as intentional discrimination. When you design spaces and systems without considering accessibility, you're sending a message that some people don't belong, that their participation isn't valued, that their contributions don't matter. She saw people in the audience nodding, taking notes, leaning forward with interest. Her confidence grew as she realized they were truly listening, truly engaged with what she was saying. Now I know some of you are thinking about costs, Sarah continued. Accessibility modifications can be expensive and budgets are always tight, but here's what I've learned through my consulting work. The most impactful changes are often the least expensive. Inclusive language in your communications costs nothing. Training your staff to be welcoming and respectful to people with disabilities costs very little. Reviewing your policies through an accessibility lens requires time but not necessarily money. And many physical modifications are far less expensive than you might think, especially when incorporated into regular maintenance and renovation cycles. She paused, taking a sip of water, letting her words sink in. Then she shifted to a more personal note. But beyond the practical and financial considerations, I want to talk about what inclusion means on a human level. When you create an accessible, inclusive environment, you're not just complying with regulations. You're telling people that they matter. You're saying that their presence is valued, their contributions are wanted, their participation is important. You're opening doors for talent and perspective that might otherwise be excluded. Sarah told them about increased confidence after being genuinely included at the wedding. She described how her own life had expanded once she found people who welcomed rather than merely tolerated them. She shared stories from other parents in her support group, tales of children with disabilities who blossomed when given opportunities to participate fully. "My son taught me something important," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "When people ask him about his wheelchair or his leg braces, he says, 'This is just how I move.' Everyone moves differently." He's 7 years old and he already understands something that many adults haven't grasped. Difference is not deficiency. Disability is not tragedy. Exclusion is the real tragedy. The real deficiency is in systems and attitudes that fail to accommodate human diversity. She concluded her speech by returning to that initial question. "Can I bring my son?" She explained how that question represented something larger, a choice between living in fear of rejection or taking the risk of seeking inclusion. "I want to challenge each of you to think about the ways your organizations might be unintentionally sending the message that some people don't belong," Sarah said. "Look at your physical spaces, review your policies, examine your attitudes. Ask yourselves, if someone sent you an email like I sent Emma, asking if they and their disabled child could participate in something your organization is hosting, what would your answer be? And more importantly, would they feel comfortable asking in the first place, or would they assume the answer was no?" She ended with a call to action. Create spaces where people don't have to ask for basic inclusion. Build communities where disability is anticipated and accommodated from the beginning, not as an afterthought or special exception. Lead with empathy and compassion. Choose inclusion, because on the other side of that choice, you might just find that everyone's life becomes richer, more meaningful, and more connected. The applause started before Sarah had finished stepping away from the podium. It grew louder and people began standing. A standing ovation, for her story, for story. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as she looked out at the audience, at Emma and James beaming with pride, at strangers moved by her words. After the speech, Sarah was surrounded by people wanting to talk with her, share their own stories, ask for her consulting services, or simply thank her for her perspective. She exchanged business cards, scheduled follow-up calls, and accepted more consulting projects than she could reasonably handle. But more than the professional opportunities, she was touched by the personal connections. A young woman approached her, tears in her eyes. "I have cerebral palsy too," she said. "I'm in law school and sometimes I feel like I don't belong, like I'm constantly having to prove myself. Your speech reminded me that I do belong, that my perspective is valuable. Thank you." An older man, clearly a senior executive based on his name tag, shook her hand firmly. "I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I've been unconsciously biased against hearing people with disabilities because I thought it would be complicated. Your speech made me realize I've been excluding qualified candidates and missing out on diverse perspectives. I'm going to change that." A woman who identified herself as an HR director said, "We have an employee who just had a baby with Down syndrome. She's been afraid to come back to work, worried about juggling everything and facing judgment. I'm going to reach out to her and make sure she knows we want to support her and that she's valued. Your story showed me how important that message is." Story after story, person after person, Sarah realized that her vulnerability had created space for others to be vulnerable too, to examine their own biases, to commit to doing better. This was why Emma had pushed her to do the keynote, not just to advance her career, but to change hearts and minds in ways that policy manuals and legal presentations never could. That evening, Sarah picked up from Rachel's house. He immediately wanted to hear everything about the speech. She described the standing ovation, the conversations afterward, the way people had responded to her message. Listened intently, his eyes wide with pride. "Mama, you're famous now," he asked seriously. Sarah laughed. "Not famous, buddy, but maybe people will listen a little more to what I have to say about making the world more accessible." "Because you're smart," stated matter-of-factly, "and because you're best advocate, you advocate for me, now you advocate for everyone." His words struck Sarah deeply. He was right. She had spent years advocating for in schools, in medical settings, in public spaces. Now she was taking that experience and using it to advocate for broader change. She was turning their personal struggles into systemic solutions. Over the following weeks and months, Sarah's consulting business grew exponentially. The keynote speech had raised her profile significantly, and she was invited to speak at other conferences, to train organizational staff, and to consult on major accessibility projects. She hired an assistant to help manage the administrative work and eventually brought on another consultant, a woman with a mobility disability who brought her own valuable perspective to their projects. His relationship with slowly improved. True to his word, he showed up consistently for their monthly visits, and over time those visits became more frequent. He took parenting classes specifically focused on children with special needs. He learned about cerebral palsy, attended some of his therapy sessions to understand his daily reality, and began contributing more substantially to his care, both financially and practically. Sarah remained cautious, protective, but she also recognized genuine effort and change. Whatever happened with going forward, she knew she and would be okay because they had built a strong support network around them. Emma announced in the spring that she was pregnant. Sarah was overjoyed for her friend, and Emma immediately asked Sarah to be one of the baby's godmothers. "You've taught me so much about real parenting, about loving unconditionally regardless of challenges. I want you to be part of my child's life to help me remember what really matters." When Emma's baby was born, a healthy girl named Grace, Sarah and were among the first visitors at the hospital. Was gentle and sweet with the baby, declaring seriously that he would be her best protector and friend. Emma and James asked to be part of Grace's baptism ceremony, another moment of inclusion that strengthened the bonds between their families. As the one-year anniversary of Emma's wedding approached, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had transformed. A year ago, she had been isolated, fearful, protecting herself and from potential rejection by avoiding most social situations. She had been struggling financially, managing everything alone, carrying the weight of single parenthood to a child with special needs without support or community. Now she had a thriving business doing work she found deeply meaningful. She had real friendships with people who understood and valued her. She had a support system that allowed her to be not just mother and caregiver but also Sarah, a whole person with her own interests, career, and identity. Had friends, attended birthday parties, participated fully in school activities, and most importantly, he had confidence in himself and his abilities. The transformation hadn't been magical or instantaneous. It had required courage, the courage to be vulnerable, to ask for what she needed, to risk rejection in pursuit of connection. It had started with one simple question: "Can I bring my son?" And Emma's answer, her generous, thoughtful, affirming yes, had opened doors Sarah hadn't even known were closed. On the actual anniversary of the wedding, Emma invited Sarah and over for a small celebration. She had printed and framed several photos from the wedding, including that beautiful shot of as ring bearer and the one of him dancing with Emma. She presented the frames to. "These are for you," Emma said, kneeling down to his level. "To remember that you are valued, that you are included, that you belong, not just at my wedding but in this world. Don't let anyone make you feel less than the amazing person you are." Hugged the frames to his chest, then hugged Emma. "Thank you for saying yes when Mama asked the question," he said. Emma looked at Sarah, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for asking the question. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to do the right thing, to grow, to be better. You've made my life richer and more meaningful." Later, as Sarah and drove home through the early autumn evening, the trees just beginning to show their fall colors again, Sarah thought about all the questions she had been afraid to ask over the years. How many opportunities had she missed? How many connections had she avoided? How much had fear limited both her life and But she also recognized that she had been doing the best she could with what she knew at the time. She had been protecting herself, and because past experiences had taught her that protection was necessary. The world had given her plenty of reasons to fear rejection and exclusion. She couldn't blame herself for the walls she had built when those walls had been necessary for survival. What mattered now was that she was learning to take those walls down, brick by brick, risk by risk. She was teaching by example that vulnerability could lead to connection, that asking for inclusion was not weakness but courage, that the right people would respond with generosity rather than judgment. That night after was asleep, Sarah opened her laptop and began writing. She had been asked by a publisher to consider writing a book about accessibility, inclusion, and her journey from isolation to advocacy. The idea had seemed overwhelming at first, but now she felt ready to tell her story more fully, to reach even more people with the message that had resonated so strongly at the conference. She titled the first chapter, "Can I Bring My Son?" and began typing, the words flowing easily as she recounted that moment of decision, standing in her bathroom with Emma's wedding invitation, struggling with fear and hope. She wrote about the email she had been terrified to send, about Emma's response that had exceeded her wildest expectations, about the wedding itself and everything that had followed. As she wrote, Sarah realized she wasn't just telling her own story. She was telling the story of everyone who had ever felt excluded, everyone who had ever been afraid to ask for what they needed, everyone who had ever questioned whether they or their loved ones truly belonged. She was writing for the single parents managing impossible challenges alone, for the people with disabilities navigating a world not designed for them, for the friends and family members who wanted to be inclusive but didn't know how. Most of all, she was writing for and for children like him, children who deserved to grow up in a world that welcomed them fully, that recognized their inherent worth, that celebrated their presence rather than merely tolerating it. She was writing to create the change she wished had existed when was born, to make the path easier for those who would come after. The wedding invitation that had caused her so much anxiety a year ago now sat framed on her desk, a reminder of the question that had changed everything. Below the formal text requesting the honor of her presence at Emma Richardson's marriage to James Cooper, Sarah had written in neat handwriting, she said yes. Those 3 words represented everything Sarah had learned over the past year, about the power of asking for what you need, about the importance of inclusion, about the beauty of genuine connection, about the courage required to be vulnerable, about the people who would show up with generosity and compassion if only given the chance. Sarah looked at the sleeping form of her son in the next room, at the framed wedding photos Emma had given him, at the business cards scattered across her desk from all the new professional connections she had made. She thought about her growing friendship group, her thriving business, her renewed sense of purpose and identity. She thought about Emma and James and baby Grace, about tentative re-entry into life, about Rachel and all her other new friends. All of this had started because she had found the courage to ask one simple question: can I bring my son? And Emma had answered with one simple word that opened up an entire world of possibility: yes. That yes had taught Sarah that there were people who would welcome her family, who would see not as an inconvenience but as a valued person. That yes had given confidence and showed him that he belonged in the world. That yes had launched Sarah's career and connected her with meaningful work. That yes had rebuilt a friendship and created new ones. That yes had transformed isolation into community, fear into courage, exclusion into belonging. As Sarah finally closed her laptop and prepared for bed, she made a promise to herself. She would continue to ask the hard questions, to advocate for herself and in others who needed inclusion. She would continue to take risks, to be vulnerable, to seek connection. She would continue to believe that the right people would answer yes, and that even when people answered no, she and would be okay because they had each other and the growing community of support around them. But most importantly, she would remember to be like Emma, to answer yes when others asked their own versions of that frightening question. She would create the inclusive, welcoming world she had longed for, one yes at a time, one open door at a time, one moment of genuine acceptance at a time. Because now she understood the profound truth that sometimes the most important question wasn't whether you would receive a yes, but whether you would have the courage to ask the question at all. And sometimes the most important answer wasn't what you said, but how you said it and the actions that followed your words. Sarah fell asleep that night feeling deeply grateful for the journey that had brought her here, for the courage she had found to ask for inclusion, and for Emma's generous response that had changed everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new opportunities. But tonight she rested in the knowledge that she and were no longer alone, no longer isolated, no longer afraid. They belonged, they had community, they had hope. And it had all started with one question and one beautiful answer that left her completely speechless with gratitude. Yes, Sarah, please bring to our wedding, her own, but also willing to allow the chance to prove he had changed. Only time would tell if his commitment would last, but she felt stronger now, more capable of handling whatever came their way. Sarah also realized that she had played a role in making this possible by finding the courage to be vulnerable, to ask for what she needed, to risk rejection in pursuit of connection. If she had simply accepted the adults-only policy without question, if she had let her past painful experiences dictate her future choices, none of this would have happened. By advocating for herself and by being honest about their situation, she had given Emma and James the opportunity to rise to the occasion. And they had exceeded every expectation. As she lay in bed that night, Sarah reflected on how profoundly her perspective had shifted over the past few weeks. She had been so prepared for rejection, so armored against potential hurt, that she had almost missed out on this experience altogether. If she hadn't found the courage to send that initial email to Emma, to be vulnerable about her needs and her fears, none of this would have happened. She would have declined the invitation, retreated further into her isolated world, and missed the opportunity to reconnect with someone who truly cared about her. With, I feel terrible that we've been so out of touch. So far, so good. Sarah's shoulders relaxed slightly, but then came the next paragraph, and Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she read Emma's response to her question about bringing to the wedding.